I should have been sitting in a doctor's office in Charlottesville that Tuesday morning. Instead, I was frozen beside my own kitchen window, listening to the man my daughter married explain how to steal everything I'd built. 3.8 million for the orchard. Another 700,000 for the cider operation. His voice was calm, precise, like he was reading a menu. And my daughter didn't say a word to stop him. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories, and thank you for being here. If you're still watching, take a second and comment below. Where in the world are you tuning in from right now? And what's the temperature outside your window? I'm always amazed by how many countries and time zones this channel connects. And just so you know, this narrative includes certain fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational value. Any resemblance to real names or locations is coincidental, but the message behind it is powerful and worth hearing. The October sunrise came slow that morning, painting the Blue Ridge in shades of amber and rust. I stood at the edge of the south orchard with a coffee mug warming my hands, watching the mist curl between rows of Honeycrisp and Fuji that stretched across the valley floor like soldiers standing at attention. 5:30 comes early most mornings. But after 45 years of working this land, my body doesn't know any other way. The Harwell Orchard sits on 260 acres in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. My great-grandfather, Samuel Harwell, planted the first 20 trees in 1912 with bare hands and borrowed money. My grandmother kept the operation alive through the Depression, selling apple cider from a roadside stand when nobody had 2 nickels to rub together. My father rebuilt after the flood of '62, replanting 3/4 of the orchard one sapling at a time, and I spent the last 45 years turning what they started into something worth protecting. A full orchard operation with a cider press that won regional awards, a farm store that drew tourists from 3 states, and water rights, older than the county courthouse. Dorothy used to say I had apple cider in my veins instead of blood. She wasn't wrong. Dot, my wife of 42 years, had been gone 6 autumns now, but I still heard her voice sometimes carried on the breeze that swept down from the ridge, especially in October when the air turned crisp and the trees bent heavy with fruit. This had been her favorite season. She'd stand right where I was standing, close her eyes, breathe in deep, and say the same thing every year. Smell that, Jean? That's 4 generations of stubborn refusing to quit. I checked the irrigation lines along the north slope, adjusted a drip emitter that had shifted overnight, and made mental notes about which rows were ready for the weekend picking crew. The Honeycrisp in Section 12 were perfect. Another 3 days, and the Fujis in Section 8 would follow. Timing is everything in an orchard. Pick too early, the sugar hasn't developed. Pick too late, the fruit drops and bruises. 45 years teaches you patience and precision, the kind you carry in your bones. The main house sat quiet as I finished my morning walk. Meredith and Nolan had driven down from Charlottesville Friday evening, said they wanted to spend the weekend helping around the place. It was unusual. My daughter practiced law in the city, specializing in estate planning, and her husband, Nolan Cross, called himself a wealth management consultant. They weren't exactly the apple-picking type, especially not in late October when mornings dipped below 40 degrees and the work was all mud and ladders. But I didn't question it. A father doesn't question when his daughter wants to come home. You just set extra plates and enjoy the company. I glanced at my watch. 7:15. The appointment with Dr. Patricia Langley in Charlottesville was at 8:30. Just the annual physical. Nothing urgent. She'd been monitoring my health for 12 years, and the reports were always the same. Strong heart, steady blood pressure, cognitive function that made her shake her head and smile. Whatever you're doing, Jean, keep doing it, she'd say every year. I intended to. I grabbed my truck keys from the hook by the mudroom door, the same hook Dot had screwed into the wall 20 years ago because I kept losing them in jacket pockets. My medical file sat on the kitchen counter. I needed it for the appointment. Previous lab results, medication list, the paperwork. Dr. Langley's office always wanted updated. I tucked it under my arm, climbed into the truck, and pulled out of the drive. The road from the orchard winds through the valley past farms and properties I've known my whole life. The Henderson dairy operation with its black and white Holsteins dotting the hillside. The old Grayson place, sold 5 years back to a couple from Northern Virginia who turned it into a bed and breakfast. The stone church at the crossroads where Dot and I were married in 1979. This land has stories, and I know every one of them. I was maybe 8 miles out, just past the Rockfish Gap turnoff, when I reached for the medical file on the passenger seat and felt nothing but leather. My stomach dropped. The file. I could picture it exactly. Sitting on the kitchen counter right next to Dorothy's dried flower arrangement. The one she'd made from wildflowers. The autumn before she got sick. Lavender and goldenrod. Preserved in a ceramic vase she'd found at a craft fair in Staunton. 6 years later, the petals were faded, but I couldn't bring myself to move them. Some things you keep because letting go means admitting they're really gone. I pulled onto the shoulder and sat for a moment. Engine idling. Weighing my options. Dr. Langley's nurse would need those previous lab results to compare. The medication list had changed slightly since my last visit, a minor dosage adjustment on the blood pressure prescription. Without the file, the appointment would be incomplete. And these physicals took weeks to reschedule. I checked the mirror. The road behind me was empty. Morning light slanting gold through the trees. If I turned around now, I could grab the file and still make it to Charlottesville by 9. Not ideal, but manageable. The decision made, I swung the truck around and headed back toward the orchard. The October sun had climbed higher by the time I turned down my drive, 7:40 by my watch. The whole detour had taken maybe 25 minutes. I parked on the gravel pad near the kitchen entrance, the spot closest to the mudroom door, and killed the engine. The house sat quiet, peaceful, just the way I'd left it. Morning light warmed the clapboard, siding that Dot and I had painted white every 5 years since we took over from my father. I stepped out, boots hitting gravel with the soft crunch that comes from decades of knowing how to move quietly on your own land. Orchardists learn that early. How to walk rows without disturbing nesting birds. How to approach the cider press without startling the seasonal workers. You learn to read the land, to move like you belong to it, rather than the other way around. That's when I heard the voices. The kitchen window was cracked open. Meredith's doing, probably. She always said the old house needed fresh air, even when it was cold enough to see your breath. She'd gotten that from Dot, who opened windows in January and called it letting the house breathe. The voices drifted out sharp and clear in the still morning air. And what I heard made the ground feel unsteady beneath my boots. Nolan's voice came first. That careful, measured tone he used when discussing numbers. But sharper now. Stripped of the charm he usually wrapped around everything he said. The evaluation is scheduled for next Tuesday. Once Dr. Chambers establishes the baseline, the conservatorship petition moves forward. We've been over this, Meredith. I stopped breathing. My hand found the porch railing, the wood smooth and worn beneath my palm. Dorothy and I had sanded and sealed this railing together the summer Meredith turned 8. She'd helped us paint it, getting more white on herself than the wood. I don't know, Nolan. Meredith's voice was quieter. Not the warm tone she used with me, but something uncertain, pressed thin. This feels wrong. The evaluation, the paperwork, all of it. Nolan cut her off. 3.8 million, Meredith. That's just the orchard and the land. The cider operation appraises separately at 700,000. Water rights, equipment, the farm store, we're looking at close to 5 million total. The numbers hit me the way a late frost hits an orchard in April. You see the damage before you feel it. $5 million. That's what 45 years of my life, 4 generations of Harwell sweat, amounted to in Nolan's mouth. A figure on a spreadsheet. But what if he finds out? Meredith asked. I could hear the worry threading through her words. The kind that comes from doubt, from a conscience that hasn't gone completely quiet. He won't. Dr. Chambers is reliable. He understands these situations. Nolan's voice dropped lower, but the kitchen window carried every syllable. The assessment will document exactly what we need. Cognitive decline, impaired judgment, inability to manage complex financial affairs. Chambers has done this over 50 times. His reports hold up in court. Conservatorship. The words settled into my chest like a stone dropped into deep water. Full control over finances, medical decisions, where I lived, whether I could sell a single bushel of apples from my own trees. It meant becoming a ward of the people who were supposed to protect me. And Thomas and Lily? Meredith asked. My other two children. Thomas in Seattle. Lily teaching music in Nashville. Good kids, but distant, in the way adult children become when they've planted their own roots far from home. Thomas barely calls, Nolan said, dismissal closing his voice like a door. Lily's got her own situation. They won't interfere. By the time either of them hears about this, the conservatorship will be granted, the trust restructured, and your father will be at Meadowbrook. $8,000 a month, but that's manageable when you're drawing from a $5 million estate. Meadowbrook. A care facility. He'd already picked one. Researched the cost, calculated the draw against my estate, and chosen where to put me, like equipment being moved to storage. My hands trembled against the railing. Not from cold. Not from age. From the kind of anger that starts deep in your gut and radiates outward until your whole body hums with it. Okay. Meredith's voice was barely a whisper. Okay. But Nolan, if this goes wrong, it won't. Trust me. Trust. The word tasted like ash. I stood frozen beside my own house, gripping the railing Dorothy and I had built together 4 decades ago. Inside, my daughter was being guided into a scheme to take my orchard, my freedom, and my dignity. She was wavering, not committed, not fully convinced, but not refusing either. Standing at the edge of something terrible, while the man beside her pushed. I didn't go inside. Orchardists learn early that you don't make decisions in the middle of a storm. You find shelter, assess the damage, and plan your response when the wind dies down. Reacting in the moment feels satisfying but accomplishes nothing except warning the enemy you're awake. My boots carried me back to the truck on instinct. I eased down the drive, keeping my speed normal. Movements unhurried. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, a sound that had marked my comings and goings for 40 years. Today, it felt like leaving something behind. I pulled into the gas station outside Waynesboro and called Dr. Langley's office. Betty answered on the second ring. Jean Harwell. We were wondering about you. Forgot my medical file at home, I said. The half-truth came easier than it should have. Think I can squeeze in this afternoon? Let me check. Keys clicking. You're in luck. Cancellation at 2. I'll be there. I sat in the truck, watching cars pass on Route 11. Normal people having normal mornings. Meanwhile, my son-in-law was inside my house calculating the price of my life, and my daughter was letting him. The questions came hard and fast. How long had this been going on? How many weekend visits had been reconnaissance instead of family time? How many casual questions about my health and finances had been evidence gathering disguised as concern? Meredith wasn't always like this. She'd grown up helping with the harvest, learning to grade apples by size and color. Dot used to say our daughter had orchard soil under her fingernails even in the courtroom. When had it changed? When had my daughter started seeing me as an obstacle instead of her father? Or maybe she hadn't. Maybe someone had taught her to. Nolan's voice had been the insistent one. Meredith's had wavered. Questioned. What if he finds out? Those weren't the words of someone fully committed. Not yet. By the time I merged back onto the highway toward Charlottesville, I'd made my decision. Investigation. Not confrontation. Evidence. Not accusations. The element of surprise was my only advantage. And I wasn't about to waste it on an emotional scene that would accomplish nothing except warning them I knew. In an orchard, the most dangerous pests are the ones you can't see. Borers that work inside the trunk, invisible until the damage is done. You don't fight them by tearing the bark open. You set traps. You monitor. You wait until you understand the full extent of the infestation before you act. Nolan Cross was boring into the trunk of my family, and I intended to find out exactly how deep the damage went before I made a single move. I had to become someone they never expected. Patient, invisible, and absolutely relentless. Because whatever doctor they'd paid, whatever timeline they'd built, they'd made one critical miscalculation. They assumed 70 meant helpless. They were wrong about that. And they wouldn't know it until I was ready. 45 years of tending apple trees teaches you one thing above all else. You never pick the fruit before it's ready. And you never fight a storm when you can outmaneuver it. The hours between the overheard conversation and my rescheduled appointment stretched long and strange. I drove the back roads through the valley, letting muscle memory handle the steering while my mind worked through what I'd heard. Conservatorship petition. Dr. Chambers. 5 million. Meadowbrook. The words cycled through my head like a sorting machine grading apples by weight. Each one examined, cataloged, set aside for later use. Dot used to say I had more patience than any man she'd ever met. She meant it as praise most of the time, though occasionally it frustrated her. Jean Harwell, you'd watch paint dry if you thought it would teach you something. But patience isn't passivity. Patience is choosing when to act, and more importantly, when not to. Every orchardist knows the difference. You wait for the right moment to prune, the right week to spray, the right day to harvest. Move too early and you waste effort. Move too late and you lose everything. Today, patience meant silence. Dr. Patricia Langley's office sat in a quiet medical complex on the east side of Charlottesville. I'd been coming here 12 years, ever since old Dr. Rollins retired, and she took over his practice. She knew my history, my medications, the gradual adjustments that come with age but don't define it. The examination room felt surreal that afternoon. Blood pressure cuff, stethoscope, the familiar sequence of tests I'd done every year. But today, every question carried weight I couldn't share. Blood pressure is excellent, she said, making notes on her tablet. 124/76. Heart sounds strong, rhythm steady. She moved through the cognitive screening with practiced ease. Date, location, current events, simple memory sequences. I'd done these tests annually for over a decade, but today they felt loaded with meaning. Jean, you're remarkable. Dr. Langley set down her pen and looked at me directly. Cognitive function is sharp. Reflex is normal. Cardiovascular health is better than most men in their 50s. Whatever you're doing out on that orchard, it's working. The irony pressed against my chest like a fist. Somewhere in Charlottesville, my daughter's husband was arranging for a doctor to declare me incompetent. Meanwhile, my actual physician was confirming the exact opposite. The dissonance was almost funny. Almost. Everything all right? Dr. Langley asked, catching something in my expression. Fine. Just thinking about all the work waiting at the orchard. Harvest season doesn't slow down for checkups. She smiled. Well, you're more than fit to handle it. I'll have the full report ready by Monday. Same time next year? Sounds good. I left with a clean bill of health documented in my medical records. 12 years of consistent, excellent results. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of what was coming, but it was something solid. Evidence. Proof. The first piece of armor in a battle I was only beginning to understand. The drive home gave me time to think strategically. If Meredith believed I was declining, someone had convinced her of it. If she mentioned evaluations, they'd already arranged one. If they were discussing conservatorship, they'd researched the legal process. This wasn't a spontaneous kitchen conversation. This was a plan already in motion, and I'd been completely blind to it. How long? Weeks? Months? How many visits had been scouting missions? How many casual phone calls had been intelligence gathering? The questions multiplied, but the path forward crystallized with each passing mile. I needed scope. How extensive was this plan? I needed evidence. What exactly were they planning, And how far along were they? And most critically, I needed allies. Because whatever was coming, I couldn't face it alone. The house sat quiet when I pulled into the drive just before 5. Meredith's car was gone. They'd left sometime during the afternoon, back to Charlottesville, back to their plans and spreadsheets and paid doctors. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the coffee they'd made that morning. Everything looked the same. Nothing was. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one Dorothy had refinished herself 20 years ago, sanding the oak surface smooth and sealing it with 3 coats of polyurethane because she said a family table should outlast the people who sit around it. She was right about that, too. I pulled out my orchard notebook, the spiral-bound ledger I used for tracking harvest yields, spray schedules, and equipment maintenance. Today it would serve a different purpose. Item 1. Find out who is helping them. Dr. Chambers was a name I didn't recognize, but doctors kept records, had reputations. Someone would know him. Item 2. Find out how far along they are. Phone records maybe. Visits I'd dismissed as normal. Patterns I'd missed because I wasn't looking. Item 3. Make sure they never see me coming. The hardest one. The most important one. Every instinct I had screamed to call Meredith. To demand answers. To fight this the way I'd fought every challenge across 45 years of orcharding. Head-on direct. No games. But orchardists also know when to be still. When to watch the weather instead of cursing it. When to let the pest reveal its full pattern before applying the treatment. I opened my phone and started recording. First video entry. Date. Time. Morning routine completed. Checked irrigation lines north slope. Adjusted drip emitter section 7. Assessed Honeycrisp readiness in section 12. Recited current inventory, operating costs, seasonal projections. The kind of detailed management that doesn't come from a failing mind. Then I turned to the computer. A skill Dot had insisted I learn 8 years ago, despite my grumbling. The world's going digital, Jean. Either you learn, or you get left behind. She'd sat beside me for weeks, walking me through email, spreadsheets, internet searches. I'd resisted. She'd persisted. She won, as usual. The Virginia conservatorship statutes loaded on the screen. The law was clearer than I'd hoped, and worse than I'd feared. 2 family members could petition. A medical evaluation was required. A court hearing would follow. If the judge found cause, conservatorship could be granted. Full control over finances, medical decisions, even where the person lived. The person under conservatorship had rights to contest, to hire an attorney. But the burden shifted. Once someone claimed you were incompetent, you had to prove you weren't. I printed every relevant statute and started building a file. That's when I remembered something Dot had said 3 years before she died. We were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset when she brought up Eleanor Simmons, her closest friend, for 30 years. They'd sold apples together at the Saturday farmers market since before Meredith was born. Something isn't right about how Eleanor lost her farm, Jean. Dot's voice had carried that particular weight she reserved for things that truly bothered her. She was sharper than me, sharper than both of us. And suddenly her son says she can't manage? Suddenly she's in a care home? I don't believe it. I just can't prove it. I'd nodded, half listening, focused on the sunset. Dot had died 18 months later. The question unresolved. The injustice unproven. Now, sitting at her table, reading conservatorship law on the computer she'd taught me to use, I wondered if the answer had been in front of us the whole time. I wrote a 4th item in my notebook. Underlined it twice. Find out what happened to Eleanor Simmons. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 8 years. Frank DeLuca. Former military police. 20 years United States Army. Now private investigator. Licensed in Virginia and 3 neighboring states. If anyone could track a predator without being seen, it was the man who'd spent 2 decades tracking them for the government. Frank DeLuca answered on the second ring, which told me 2 things. He was still sharp, and he was still the kind of man who kept his phone within reach because the world had taught him readiness wasn't optional. DeLuca Investigations. Frank, it's Gene Harwell. Shenandoah Valley. The Orchard. A pause. Then recognition. Gene. The irrigation case. 2016. Someone was siphoning water from your north slope lines. You found the source in 2 days. Good memory. What can I do for you? I need someone to look into a family matter. Sensitive. I chose my words with the same care I used when assessing a damaged tree. My daughter and her husband are planning to file for conservatorship. They think I'm declining. I'm not. I need to know what they're planning, who's helping them, and how far along they are. Frank let out a slow breath. You sure about what you heard? I was standing 3 feet from an open window. All right. Give me everything. I spent 20 minutes laying it out. The overheard conversation, Dr. Chambers, the evaluation scheduled for next Tuesday, the $5 million figure, the care facility they'd already chosen. Frank asked clarifying questions with the efficiency I remembered. Methodical. Creative. Relentless. I can start today, he said. Background on the son-in-law, financial records, everything on this Dr. Chambers. One more thing, Gene. Document your own competence. Daily activities. Financial management. Medical records. Build a paper trail. Already started. 2 days passed. I worked the orchard, maintained the cider press, reviewed accounts, and waited. Any orchardist will tell you, waiting is the hardest part. You can't speed up ripening. You do your work and trust that the process delivers. Frank called Wednesday evening. I was sitting in the study at Dot's desk. Her filing cabinets lined up behind me like sentries. Gene, you sitting down? I set my coffee on the coaster Dot had painted at a craft fair in Lexington. I'm listening. Nolan Cross. Licensed as a financial advisor in 2012. That license was revoked by the state of North Carolina in 2020 for fraudulent misrepresentation of client assets. He told clients he was investing their money. He was paying personal debts. Go on. Current financial situation is a disaster. Credit card debt. $650,000. Behind on rent, 3 months running. His consulting business grossed $38,000 last year. Frank paused. That's not a living, Gene. That's drowning. $650,000 in debt. A revoked license. $38,000 income. Nolan didn't want my orchard. Because he was greedy. He needed it. Because he was desperate. Now, Dr. Martin Chambers, Frank continued. Office in Charlottesville. Geriatric psychiatric evaluations. Technically clean record. But over the past decade, he's conducted 52 conservatorship evaluations. 46 resulted in recommendations for full conservatorship. I did the math. 88%. State average is 38. He's not evaluating patients, he's manufacturing diagnoses. And your son-in-law paid him $20,000 3 weeks ago. Wire transfer. I've got the receipt. $20,000 to a doctor who found incompetence the way a rigged scale finds overweight. Every time. Predictably. Profitably. There's more, Frank said. And his voice dropped into that register people use when the news shifts from bad to worse. Nolan has a brother. Brett Cross. Accountant. Lives outside Richmond. I've met him once. Meredith's wedding. 3 weeks ago, Brett visited a conservatorship attorney in Richmond. Appointment confirmed through public record. The heir left the room. His target is their father. Calvin Cross. 75 years old. Retired. Lives alone in Churchill, Richmond. Vietnam veteran. 2 tours. Purple Heart. Widowed. 5 years. 6 months ago, Calvin's brother passed away. Estate cleared probate in August. Calvin inherited $1.9 million. 2 brothers. 2 fathers. 2 conservatorship petitions timed to coincide. Nolan targets you, Frank said, his voice flat with professional disgust. $3.8 million in land plus the cider operation. Brett targets Calvin. $1.9 million inheritance. Both brothers drowning in debt. Both fathers with significant assets. Both plans using the same doctor. $5.7 million. I said quietly. $5.7 million. That's what your children decided you're worth. Not as fathers. As accounts to be liquidated. Silence filled the study. Outside, the orchard settled into evening stillness, trees standing patient in the fading light. Inside, the world I thought I understood continued to crack apart. Send me everything on Calvin Cross, I said finally. If his sons are coming for him, he deserves to know. Already compiling. Full package by Friday. One more thing. This Dr. Chambers. How many of those 52 people actually needed conservatorship? A pause. Based on what I've found, maybe a dozen. The rest were people like you. Competent. Independent. Targeted by family members who wanted their money. Chambers gave them medical cover, and nobody asked questions. 40 people. 40 lives rearranged, freedom stripped, homes lost, because one doctor sold diagnoses and the system didn't catch it. I thought about Eleanor Simmons, Dot's friend who'd lost her farm under circumstances my wife never believed were right. Frank. One more name. Eleanor Simmons. Lost her property through conservatorship about 5 years back. Lived 20 miles from here. My wife always said something was wrong about it. Connected to this? I don't know yet. But my wife was usually right about people. After we hung up, I sat in the darkening study surrounded by Dot's meticulous records. 45 years of tax returns, equipment logs, harvest yields, all filed chronologically, all proving a life managed with discipline and clarity. $5.7 million. 2 fathers targeted by their own blood. A doctor who sold competence evaluations, like produce, at a roadside stand. And somewhere in all of it, the ghost of a question my wife had asked before she died. I looked at Dorothy's photograph on the desk. Taken the autumn before her diagnosis, standing in the south orchard with the Blue Ridge behind her, smiling like she owned the whole valley. I'm going to figure this out, Dot, I said to the photograph. All of it. The orchard outside stood dark against the early stars. Patient trees waiting for the season to turn. I intended to do the same. Tuesday evening, Nolan and Meredith came for dinner. They arrived around 6. Meredith carrying a bottle of wine she knew I wouldn't drink. Nolan shaking my hand with that firm, confident grip he used on everyone. The kind that says, "Trust me," before you've had reason to. I'd spent the afternoon preparing. Not the meal, though I'd made pot roast the way Dot taught me. Slow cooked with rosemary from the garden and potatoes from the root cellar. The real preparation was simpler. My phone sat in my shirt pocket. Voice recorder running. The microphone positioned to catch every word spoken at the table Dorothy had refinished 20 years ago. Virginia is a one-party consent state. If I was part of the conversation, I could legally record it. Frank had confirmed that Monday morning. Document everything, Gene. Every question they ask. Every answer you give. Build a record that proves you're sharp, even when they're trying to prove you're not. We sat down to eat. The roast steamed on the platter. The kitchen smelled the way it always did on Tuesday evenings when Dot was alive. Warm, savory, like a home that still remembered how to be one. Nolan cut into his meat with precise, measured strokes. Gene, what day is today? I looked up from my plate. Let a beat pass. Just one beat longer than natural. Tuesday, I said. Then added, as though searching for it, October the 22nd. Correct. Completely correct. But the hesitation was deliberate. A small performance designed to feed exactly what Nolan wanted to see. His eyes brightened. The way a fisherman's eyes brighten when the line goes taut. He thought he'd caught a glimpse of the confusion he needed. What he actually caught was bait. "And what did you have for breakfast this morning?" Meredith asked. Her voice carried the forced lightness of someone following a script she hadn't fully rehearsed. She wouldn't look directly at me when she asked. "Oatmeal. Same as every morning for 12 years. 8 o'clock. With the blood pressure medication. Lisinopril. 10 milligrams. I watched her carefully. "Why? You worried about something, sweetheart?" "Just checking in, Dad." She smiled, but it didn't settle in her eyes. There was guilt there, buried under concern that wasn't quite real. I recognized it because I'd raised her. I knew every expression that face could make. And this one was new. This one had been taught. Nolan shifted tactics with the smooth ease of a man who'd practiced redirecting conversations his whole career. "How are the orchard finances looking?" "Property taxes coming due, aren't they?" "Paid them October 15th. Deadline's the same every year. Has been since my father's time." I took a sip of water, held his gaze. "You interested in orchard finances, Nolan?" "Just curious how the operation runs." "It runs fine. Gross revenue from apple sales and the cider operation averaged $185,000 over the last 3 years. Operating costs sit around $110,000, depending on the season. Net puts me comfortable. Plus savings. The land's been paid off since '96. I paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. "Want me to walk you through the spreadsheets?" Dot taught me to keep them on the computer, updated every Sunday. His smile tightened. The kind of tightening that happens when you realize your target just demonstrated the exact competence you need him to lack. Meredith jumped in. "Dad, we're just glad you're managing everything so well." The irony could have filled the room. They needed me to be declining, but I kept demonstrating the opposite. Every question designed to expose weakness instead revealed strength. Every test they ran, I passed. And the phone in my pocket recorded it all. Time-stamped, admissible. Proof that a man they wanted declared incompetent had answered every question with precision, clarity, and the kind of financial detail that comes from 45 years of managing a complex agricultural operation. After dinner, Meredith hugged me goodbye at the door. Her arms held on a fraction too long. I felt the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor that comes from carrying a secret you're not built to carry. My daughter wasn't a natural liar. Nolan had trained her into this. And the training was fraying at the edges. Nolan shook my hand. That grip again. "Take care of yourself, Jean. Always do." I watched their taillights disappear down the gravel drive, red points fading into the October darkness. Then I walked through the house, turning off lights, checking doors, the nightly routine I'd performed for 4 decades. Everything normal, everything a lie. That's when I saw it. A business card on the coffee table, partially hidden beneath a farming magazine. I picked it up and read both sides. Dr. Martin Chambers, Geriatric Psychiatry. A Charlottesville address and phone number printed in clean professional font. On the back, handwritten in blue ink, a date. Next Tuesday, 2:30. Nolan must have dropped it. Whether accidentally or deliberately, I couldn't tell. Maybe he wanted me to find it, wanted me to call out of confusion or concern, walk myself right into the evaluation he'd arranged. Maybe he was simply careless. Men who think they're smarter than everyone in the room tend to get sloppy about details. Either way, it was a gift. I photographed both sides with my phone, capturing every detail in sharp focus. The front with its professional credentials, the back with that handwritten appointment time. Then I texted the images to Frank with a message. "Found this on my coffee table after dinner." Nolan left it. "Same doctor from your report. Chambers. Appointment written on the back for next Tuesday." Frank responded within minutes. Photographed and logged. "I'll add it to the file." I started typing a second message, then stopped and rewrote it. Something had been nagging at me since Frank's report. The affair. Brett's complicity. The coordinated targeting of two fathers. There was a connector somewhere. A person linking the brothers' schemes together. Someone who made the machinery run. Frank. One more thing. Nolan's brother Brett is married. Wife's name is Stacy Cross. She's a nurse. I need you to look into her. Employment history, financial records, any connection to Dr. Chambers or the medical system where my records are kept. Noted. Why the nurse specifically? I stared at the business card still sitting on the coffee table, its clean white surface glowing under the lamp. Because Nolan is a financial predator. Brett is an accountant who follows orders. But someone in this scheme understands medicine. Someone knows how to make a healthy man look sick on paper. And a nurse, married to Nolan's brother, working inside a hospital system, has access that neither of those men would have on their own. Frank was quiet for a moment. That's good thinking, Gene. 45 years of pest management. You learn to look for the vector, not just the damage. I set the phone down and looked at the business card one last time. Dr. Martin Chambers. The man who'd been paid $20,000 to steal my independence with a diagnosis. His card sat on my coffee table like a snake coiled on warm stone, waiting for someone foolish enough to reach for it. I wasn't that someone. But I intended to find out exactly how many people had been. Frank called Thursday evening. I was in the cider press building, checking fermentation temperatures on the late-season batch. Apples don't lie about their sugar content. And yeast doesn't play politics. After a week of deception and discovery, the honest simplicity of cider making felt like the only clean thing left. Gene. You sitting down? I leaned against the press. Steel cold through my shirt. Just tell me. Stacy Cross. You were right about her. She's more than Brett's wife. She's Nolan's. He let that land. They've been having an affair for 14 months. 12 meetings at hotels in Harrisonburg and Winchester. Always midweek. Always 2 to 3 hours. Always. Stacy's credit card. 14 months. The affair started before any conservatorship planning, before Nolan's financial desperation peaked, before Calvin's inheritance cleared probate. This wasn't opportunistic. This was who Nolan was. 16 photographs, Frank continued. Restaurant, hotel parking lot, body language, leaving no room for misinterpretation. All time-stamped. Text messages obtained legally through subpoena preparation. Stacy writes, "When are you going to leave her?" Nolan responds, "Soon. After the financial matters settle. Trust me. Trust me." The same hollow words he'd used with Meredith in my kitchen. Nolan collected trust the way some people collected coins, acquiring it from everyone, honoring it with no one. "Here's where your instinct pays off," Frank said. And something harder replaced his professional neutrality. Stacy works as a registered nurse at Augusta Health in Fishersville, same hospital system where your primary care records are stored. The cider press building went very quiet. She accessed your medical records 6 times over the past 4 months. Access logs time-stamped, traceable, undeniable. 6 times. A woman I'd met twice at family gatherings had been reading my medical history for 4 months. The violation felt physical, like someone had opened a window into the most private parts of my life. It gets worse. She didn't just read them. She edited them. My hand tightened on the phone. 3 entries in 90 days. Notes added to your file. Mild cognitive concerns noted by family. Patient reports occasional confusion regarding medication schedule. Recommend follow-up cognitive screening. Small additions that look unremarkable individually, but build a pattern. When someone like Dr. Chambers reads them, someone had poisoned my medical records. The clean 12-year history Dr. Langley maintained with precision had been quietly contaminated by a nurse sleeping with my son-in-law. False notes designed to support a diagnosis that didn't exist, planted in a system I trusted to tell the truth about my own body. "That's a federal crime," Frank said. HIPAA violation. Unauthorized access and modification of protected health information. Fines and prison time. I stared at the fermentation tanks, amber liquid doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Honest work producing honest results. The opposite of everything I was learning about the people my daughter had married into. One more piece, Frank continued. Nolan's browser history, obtained through legal channels. He read the search entries, each one landing like a stone dropped from increasing height. Conservatorship for incapacitated parents, Virginia. April 12th. Memory care facilities cost, Virginia. April 20th. Average lifespan dementia, patients. May 3rd, June 8th, and August 15th, 3 times. He'd searched how long dementia patients typically survived. 3 separate occasions, across 4 months. Not idle curiosity. The kind of cold, systematic research you do when calculating return on investment and the investment is your father-in-law's remaining years. April. Right after connecting with Dr. Chambers. He'd been hunting me for 6 months, and I'd been completely blind to it. I thought about Dot. The way she read people like weather patterns. She'd met Nolan twice. At the wedding and one Christmas dinner. Afterward, she'd pulled me aside in the kitchen, drying her hands on the towel draped over her shoulder. That young man looks at people like they're instruments, Jean. Not human beings. Just instruments to be played. I dismissed it. Told her she was reading too much into a nervous son-in-law. She'd given me that look, the one that said she knew she was right and would wait for me to catch up. 6 years later, I'd caught up. Frank, what about Eleanor Simmons? Still working on it. But I've got a preliminary connection. 5 years ago, a financial advisor named Nathan Wells consulted for Eleanor's family. Shortly after, her son filed for conservatorship. The evaluating doctor was Martin Chambers. The room tilted. Nathan Wells, running the name now. Could be an alias, could be coincidence. But the Chambers connection is confirmed. Same doctor, same type of case. Eleanor lost her farm. Same result. I repeated quietly. The words tasted rotten. Give me 48 hours on Wells. I want to be certain before drawing the line. After we hung up, I walked through the orchard in the dark. Trees stood in their rows, patient and silent. Branches heavy with fruit that would be harvested this weekend by hands that had done this work for 45 years. My hands, still steady, still capable, still mine. Nolan wasn't just stealing from me and Calvin. He was systematically destroying everyone around him. Brett's marriage, Meredith's trust, Stacy's future, Calvin's independence, my life's work, my medical records, all calculated moves in a game where only he mattered. And somewhere 20 miles away, Eleanor Simmons sat in a care facility, put there by the same doctor, possibly the same man under a different name. Dot had tried to help her. Cancer stole that chance, but I was still here. And the case against Nolan grew stronger with every phone call, which meant the next step was clear. Calvin Cross needed to know. He needed to know before his sons moved again. And I needed an ally who understood exactly what it felt like to discover your own children were circling like predators. The drive to Richmond would take 90 minutes. I planned to make it Friday. The morning after my meeting with Calvin Cross, I woke at 4:15. That is not unusual for a man who has spent 45 years rising before the sun. What was unusual was the weight sitting on my chest, not physical, not medical, but the kind of heaviness that comes from knowing you are about to shatter someone's world. I had evidence of an affair. I had timestamps, photographs, hotel receipts, and text messages that would unravel a marriage. And the person I needed to show them to was not a stranger. Brett Cross was Nolan's brother, Calvin's older son, and the husband of a woman who had been sleeping with Nolan for 14 months while simultaneously tampering with my medical records. I spent the first hour in the orchard, walking row 12. the oldest section where my great-grandfather Samuel planted his original Albemarle pippins in 1912. The trees there are gnarled, scarred by ice storms and drought, but they still produce fruit every October. I have always believed that the things which endure the most damage bear the sweetest yield. I needed to believe that now, because what I was about to do would cause damage, and I had to trust that something worthwhile would come from it. Frank DeLuca arrived at my farmhouse at 7:30 with a manila envelope and 2 cups of black coffee from the gas station in Waynesboro. He set the envelope on the kitchen table, the same oak table where Dorothy and I had eaten 10,000 meals, where Meredith had done her homework, where I had signed the deed transferring the North Pasture into the cider operation 12 years ago. Now it held 16 photographs of Nolan Cross, entering and exiting hotels in Harrisonburg and Winchester with Stacy Cross, his brother's wife. 12 visits over 14 months. Every one of them on a weekday afternoon when Brett was at work and Meredith was at her office in Staunton. "You're sure about giving these to Brett first?" Frank asked. I was sure. My reasoning was strategic, not emotional. Brett Cross was a general contractor, practical, methodical, proud. He had served 4 years in the Army, same as his father. If I showed him the affair evidence, he would not collapse. He would get angry. And angry men who feel betrayed become willing allies. More importantly, Brett was the only person who could get close enough to Nolan without raising suspicion. Brothers talk. Brothers share plans. If Brett agreed to help, he could wear a wire, record conversations, and provide the kind of first-hand testimony that no amount of surveillance photography could match. I called Brett at 8:15 and asked him to meet me at the farm. I told him it concerned his father, which was not entirely untrue. Calvin's safety was part of this. Brett arrived 40 minutes later in his white Ford F-250, mud on the fenders, work boots already laced. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I placed the envelope between us. "Before you open that," I said, "I need you to understand something. What is inside will hurt. It will make you angry. But I am not showing you this to cause pain. I am showing you because your brother and your wife are involved in something that goes beyond what is in this envelope, and I need your help to stop it." Brett opened the envelope. He went through the photographs one by one, his jaw tightening with each image. I watched his hands. They did not shake. His breathing changed, slower, deeper, controlled, the way a man breathes when he is forcing himself not to react. When he reached the text message transcripts, he read them twice. The worst line, Stacy writing, "When are you going to leave her?" and Nolan replying, "Soon, after the financial matters settle," made Brett set the paper down and press both palms flat against the table. "Financial matters," he repeated. His voice was quiet, but there was granite underneath. I told him everything. I laid out the conservatorship scheme. How Nolan planned to have me declared incompetent using a paid evaluation from Dr. Martin Chambers, whose 8% conservatorship recommendation rate dwarfed the Virginia state average of 38%. I explained the $20,000 wire transfer from Nolan to Chambers, the 6 unauthorized accesses of my medical records by Stacy at Augusta Health, the 3 falsified entries she had added, mild cognitive concerns, occasional confusion regarding medication schedule, and a recommendation for cognitive screening that no legitimate physician had ordered. I told him about Nolan's $650,000 in debt, his revoked financial advisor license, and his annual income of just $38,000. I told him about the second scheme targeting Calvin's $1.9 million inheritance, and the conservatorship attorney Brett's own brother had consulted in Richmond. Then I told him about Eleanor Simmons. 5 years ago, a financial advisor named Nathan Wells had approached Eleanor's family in Roanoke. After his consultation, her son filed for conservatorship. Dr. Martin Chambers, the same doctor, conducted the evaluation. Eleanor lost her farm. Frank was now investigating whether Nathan Wells was an alias for Nolan Cross. Brett sat in silence for nearly a full minute. I let him. Silence, in my experience, is where decisions are made. Words come before and after, but the choice itself lives in the quiet space between them. "What do you need me to do?" he finally asked. I told him the plan. Virginia is a one-party consent state for audio recording. If Brett agreed, he could record conversations with Nolan in person, on the phone, anywhere. I needed Nolan to discuss the conservatorship plan. Mention Dr. Chambers. Reference the financial targets, and ideally admit to the timeline. Every recorded word would become evidence. I also needed Brett to document any interaction between Nolan and Stacy that connected her medical record tampering to the conservatorship filing. "There is one condition," I added. "You cannot confront Nolan or Stacy about the affair until after the court hearing. If they know we have this evidence, they will destroy what they can and change their story. I need them confident. I need them careless." Brett looked at the photographs one more time. Then he stacked them neatly, slid them back into the envelope, and pushed it across the table toward me. "Keep those safe," he said. "I will get you what you need." He stood, shook my hand, and walked to his truck. I watched him drive down the gravel lane, past the cider barn, past the farm store, past the rows of Gold Rush and Arkansas Black that were heavy with October fruit. He did not speed. He did not swerve. He drove the way a man drives when he has made a decision and intends to see it through. I picked up my phone and called Frank. "Brett is in," I said. "Move to phase 2. Frank paused for a moment. "How did he take it?" I looked at the kitchen table, at the ring of coffee where Brett's cup had been, at the faint scratches Dorothy had made 20 years ago when she was refinishing the surface. "The way his father would have," I said. Quietly and completely. I waited 3 days before I spoke to Meredith. Not because I was uncertain, but because I needed those 3 days to prepare myself for the possibility that my daughter would choose her husband over her father. I had raised Meredith alone for the last 9 years, since Dorothy passed. I had driven her to volleyball practice in middle school, sat in the front row at her college graduation from James Madison University, walked her down the aisle at the vineyard wedding she and Nolan had planned in Charlottesville. Every memory I had of her was threaded with pride, and now I had to sit across from her and show her that the man she married was a fraud, a thief, and an adulterer, and that she had been part of the plan to take my freedom. Brett had already delivered. In the 72 hours since our meeting at the kitchen table, he had recorded 2 phone conversations with Nolan. The first, on a Wednesday evening, captured Nolan confirming the timeline. Dr. Chambers would conduct Jean's evaluation the following Tuesday. The conservatorship petition would be filed within 10 days of a favorable report, and Meredith would serve as the petitioning family member. The second recording, made Thursday afternoon from Brett's truck outside a job site, was worse. Nolan told Brett that once the conservatorship was granted, he intended to sell the cider operation first $700,000, maybe more if we moved before winter, and then lease the orchard land to a development company that had already expressed interest. He mentioned a figure, $3.8 million for the land alone. He never once mentioned where I would live or what would happen to me after the sale. Frank compiled everything into a single digital file on an encrypted USB drive. Brett's 2 recordings, the 16 hotel photographs, the text message transcripts between Nolan and Stacy, the 6 HIPAA access logs from Augusta Health, the 3 falsified medical record entries, Nolan's browser search history showing conservatorship research dating back to April, the $20,000 wire transfer to Dr. Chambers, and Nolan's complete financial profile, $650,000 in debt, $38,000 annual income, revoked license. I asked Frank to also include a 1-page summary timeline. Because Meredith was analytical. She had studied business administration. She would want to see the pattern laid out in sequence, not scattered across documents. I called Meredith on Saturday morning and asked her to come to the farm for lunch, just the two of us. She arrived at noon in the silver Subaru she had driven since graduate school, wearing a navy cardigan I recognized as one of Dorothy's. That detail almost broke me. She hugged me in the kitchen doorway, and I held on perhaps a second longer than usual, because I did not know whether she would still want to embrace me by the end of the afternoon. We ate chicken salad sandwiches at the kitchen table. I asked about her work at the accounting firm in Staunton. She talked about a difficult audit. I asked about the garden she had planted behind her townhouse. She said the tomatoes had done well, but the basil bolted early. For 30 minutes, we were simply father and daughter, and the conversation moved the way it always had. Easy, warm, unhurried. I memorized every minute of it, because I understood that what came next would change the texture of every conversation we would ever have again. After lunch, I placed my laptop on the table and opened the file Frank had prepared. I turned the screen toward Meredith. Before I play this, I said, I want you to know 3 things. First, I love you. That has not changed and will not change regardless of what happens in this room. Second, I know about the conservatorship plan. I have known for 3 weeks. Third, what you are about to see and hear will be difficult, but I am not showing you this to punish you. I am showing you because you deserve to know the truth about the man you married, and because I believe I have to believe that my daughter is better than the worst decision she has been talked into. Meredith's face went pale. Her hands, resting on the table, curled slowly inward until her fingernails pressed against her palms. She did not speak. She did not deny anything. That silence told me she already knew she was guilty and had perhaps been waiting, hoping, even for someone to stop her before she went further. I played Brett's first recording. Nolan's voice filled the kitchen, calm and businesslike, discussing the evaluation timeline and the petition filing as though he were scheduling a roof repair rather than dismantling a man's autonomy. Meredith closed her eyes. I played the second recording, the one where Nolan detailed selling the cider operation and leasing the orchard to developers. When he said $3.8 million for the land alone, Meredith opened her eyes and stared at the screen as though she were seeing her husband clearly for the first time. Then I showed her the photographs. Nolan and Stacy at the Hampton Inn in Harrisonburg, March 14. Nolan and Stacy at the Holiday Inn Express in Winchester, May 22, 12 meetings, 14 months. I showed her the text messages, Stacy asking, "When are you going to leave her?" And Nolan replying, "Soon." After the financial matters settle, I watched my daughter's expression move through shock, recognition, humiliation, and finally something colder, something that looked like the first edge of fury. I showed her the HIPAA evidence. Stacy's 6 unauthorized accesses of my records at Augusta Health, the 3 falsified entries designed to make me appear cognitively impaired. I showed her Dr. Chambers' statistics, 88% conservatorship recommendation rate against a state average of 38%, and the $20,000 wire payment. I showed her Nolan's debt, his revoked license, his search history reaching back to April. When the last document closed, Meredith sat motionless. Tears ran down her face, but she made no sound. The kitchen was quiet, except for the ticking of the mantel clock Dorothy had bought at an estate sale in Lexington 30 years ago. "He told me you were getting worse," Meredith whispered. "He said he noticed things forgetting names, leaving the stove on, repeating stories. He said Dr. Chambers was the best in the region. He said it was the responsible thing to do." She looked at me. "I wanted to believe I was protecting you." "I know," I said. And I meant it. Nolan had not chosen Meredith as his accomplice because she was cruel. He had chosen her because she loved me enough to be frightened by the idea of losing me, and he had weaponized that fear. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "I need your help, Meredith. Not to forgive what has happened, we will get to that later, you and I. Right now, I need you to do something harder than forgiveness. I need you to stay. Stay in your marriage. Stay in the plan. Attend the evaluation with Dr. Chambers on Tuesday as though nothing has changed. And when the time comes in court, under oath, I need you to tell the truth." Meredith wiped her face with the sleeve of Dorothy's cardigan. She looked at the laptop screen, then at the oak table, then at the window above the sink where the afternoon light fell across the orchard in long golden rows. "Teach me," she said. The sting began on a Monday, the 28th of October. At 6:14 in the morning, I stood at the kitchen sink holding a cup of coffee I did not drink, watching the first light climb the ridgeline above the orchard. I had not slept well, not from fear, but from the precision the coming week demanded. 4 people would operate in coordinated secrecy against a man who believed he was the smartest person in every room. One misplaced word, one glance held too long, and Nolan Cross would know. If he knew, he would destroy evidence. Coach Stacy. Withdraw the conservatorship petition and disappear into another state with another name, the way Frank suspected he had done 5 years ago, as Nathan Wells. I reviewed the plan at the kitchen table one final time. Frank DeLuca had designed it with military police discipline, and I had refined it with the patience of a man who understands that apple trees do not fruit on your schedule. The operation had 4 objectives. First, obtain recorded admissions from Nolan, detailing the conservatorship scheme, the financial targets, and his coordination with Dr. Martin Chambers. Brett would handle this through phone calls and in-person conversations. Second, document the ongoing affair between Nolan and Stacy through continued surveillance. Frank would manage this from a rented vehicle. Third, secure independent medical evaluations. Proving my cognitive and physical health, I had scheduled appointments with Dr. Patricia Langley on Wednesday and Dr. Howard Osei, a board-certified neuropsychologist in Charlottesville, on Thursday. Fourth, monitor any further tampering with my medical records at Augusta Health. Frank had a contact who could flag new access to my patient file in real time. Monday was Brett's day. He called Nolan at 11:40, ostensibly to discuss a subcontracting job in Waynesboro. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. For the first 14, they discussed framing costs and insulation, the kind of mundane detail that would make any recording sound authentic. Then Brett shifted. He told Nolan he was worried about Calvin, said the old man seemed confused at dinner, had repeated a Vietnam story twice. He asked whether the plan was still on track. Nolan took the bait. He confirmed Dr. Chambers would evaluate me on Tuesday, November 5th at 2:30. Meredith would accompany me and provide a statement describing cognitive decline. The petition would be filed within 10 business days. Then Nolan added something we had not anticipated. He had already spoken with a commercial real estate broker in Richmond. Preliminary valuation, $3.8 million for the land and structures, $700,000 for the cider operation including equipment, inventory, and brand licensing. His exact words, "Once the conservatorship goes through, we liquidate within 60 days. Spring market is better, but I cannot carry this debt another 6 months." That sentence contained everything: motive, timeline, financial desperation, intent to liquidate assets that did not belong to him. Brett asked one follow-up. "And what about Dad?" Nolan paused. "One thing at a time. Gene's estate is the priority. Dad's situation is simpler, smaller amount, fewer complications. We handle Gene first, then file on Dad before summer." Brett delivered the recording to my farm on a micro SD card. Frank listened on speakerphone from Harrisonburg. When it ended, Frank said, "That's enough." I disagreed. Enough for an accusation, perhaps. Not enough for a conviction. I wanted every door sealed before Nolan knew the house was on fire. Tuesday belonged to Meredith. She accompanied Nolan to a lunch meeting with Patricia Devane, a paralegal at the Richmond law firm handling the petition. Meredith wore a lapel pin containing a microphone. Frank had provided the same type used by insurance fraud investigators, $40 online. The lunch lasted an hour and 15 minutes on Carey Street. Devane outlined the filing procedure. 2 family members petition the court. A medical evaluation from a licensed specialist is attached. A hearing is scheduled within 30 days. She confirmed that Dr. Chambers' report, combined with Meredith's testimony, would meet the evidentiary threshold. Nolan asked whether I would be required to attend. Devane said yes, but if the medical report indicated significant impairment, the judge might limit my participation. Nolan smiled. Meredith told me later that his smile was the moment she fully understood what she had almost helped him do. Wednesday morning, I drove to Charlottesville for Dr. Patricia Langley's comprehensive evaluation. Blood pressure, 122/74. Resting heart rate, 68. Respiratory function, normal. Grip strength, above average for my age. She administered the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. I scored 29 out of 31 point lost on delayed recall, which Langley noted was within normal variation and not clinically significant. She provided a signed, dated letter stating that Eugene Harwell, age 70, demonstrated no cognitive impairment and was fully capable of managing his personal, medical, and financial affairs. Thursday, I sat in the office of Dr. Howard Osei, a neuropsychologist with 23 years of experience and faculty appointments at UVA and Virginia Commonwealth. His evaluation was more rigorous. A 3-hour battery covering memory recall, executive function, verbal fluency, attention, visuospatial processing, and problem-solving under time constraints. My results placed me in the 78th percentile for my age cohort across all domains. He produced a 14-page report concluding that any conservatorship petition filed on cognitive grounds would be, in his professional judgment, without medical merit. I drove home Thursday evening with both medical reports locked in my glove compartment. The sky over the Blue Ridge was the color of bruised copper, and the orchard was heavy with the last of the season's fruit. I had 4 days of recorded evidence, 2 independent medical evaluations, a flip daughter, a recruited brother, and an investigator who had not slept more than 5 hours any night that week. The sting was half complete. I parked beside the cider barn and sat in my truck, watching light fade between the rows of Gold Rush and Arkansas Black. Somewhere in Staunton, Nolan Cross was eating dinner with my daughter, believing everything was proceeding according to his plan. He did not know about the recordings, the medical reports, his brother's betrayal, or the 16 photographs of his affair. He did not know that a 70-year-old farmer with dirt under his fingernails had spent 4 days building a case that would end his freedom. I turned off the engine. Friday was coming. Friday morning, Frank DeLuca parked a rented gray Chevrolet Malibu in the lot of the Hampton Inn on South Main Street in Harrisonburg at 9:15. He had chosen the spot with care, 3rd row, facing the lobby entrance, angled so that both the front door and the side stairwell were visible through the windshield. On the dashboard sat a Nikon D850 with a telephoto lens resting on a beanbag stabilizer. A directional microphone fed into a digital recorder on the passenger seat. Stacy Cross's credit card records showed she had booked a room for Friday afternoon, the 13th reservation in 14 months. Always midweek or early Friday. Always when Brett was working and Meredith was at her office in Staunton. At 12:47, Stacy's white Honda CR-V pulled in. She parked near the side entrance, checked her phone, and walked into the lobby carrying a small overnight bag. Frank photographed her entry timestamp, license plate, face visible. 17 minutes later, Nolan's black Nissan Altima entered from the opposite side of the lot. He parked 2 rows from Stacy's vehicle, near the dumpster enclosure, as though distance would create deniability. Frank captured 11 consecutive frames, the car entering, Nolan stepping out, glancing across the lot, then walking to the side stairwell without entering the lobby. He had a key card. Stacy had obtained 2 at check-in. This was not improvised. It was routine. Frank remained for 4 hours and 37 minutes. He documented every movement, a curtain shift on the 3rd floor at room 314. Nolan appearing briefly at the window at 2:15. Stacy departing at 5:18. Nolan leaving 11 minutes later through the stairwell. 23 photographs total. Each one time-stamped. GPS tagged by the camera's internal receiver, and backed up wirelessly to Frank's encrypted cloud storage before he turned the ignition. While Frank sat in that parking lot, I was doing exactly what a 70-year-old farmer does on a Friday in late October, supervising the final gold rush harvest. My foreman Lucas had 12 seasonal workers in the North Block. I walked the rows with a clipboard, checking bin counts, inspecting fruit for bitter pit and sooty blotch, the way I had done every autumn for 4 decades. If anyone had driven past the farm, they would have seen nothing unusual. An old man in a canvas jacket and boots, moving slowly through his trees. That was the point. The best disguise I wore during the entire operation was simply being myself. Saturday morning, Frank called at 7:40 while I was feeding the barn cats 3 calicos Dorothy had adopted 7 years ago. I kept them because abandoning something my wife loved was not something I could do, even if they showed me no affection in return. "Nathan Wells," Frank said. "It's him." The investigation had taken Frank through Roanoke County Public Records, North Carolina corporate filings, and the State Securities Board's database of revoked licenses. Nathan Wells had operated as an independent financial advisor in Roanoke from 2017 to 2019, targeting elderly clients, specifically widows and widowers, with significant property and limited family oversight. His method was consistent: free consultations to establish trust, identification of a cooperative family member, a medical evaluation by a specific doctor, and a conservatorship filing that placed the target's assets under a court-appointed guardian. A guardian who then hired Wells as financial manager of the estate. Eleanor Simmons was his second client. In 2019, Wells approached Eleanor's son David in Charlotte and suggested that Eleanor, then 73, was showing cognitive decline that endangered her ability to manage her 140-acre farm. David, who visited his mother twice a year, agreed to an evaluation. The evaluating physician was Dr. Martin Chambers, the same Dr. Chambers. His report recommended full conservatorship. The court granted it. Within 6 months, Eleanor's farm was sold for $1.1 million, roughly $300,000 below appraised market value. Nathan Wells received a management fee of $88,000. Eleanor was placed in an assisted living facility in Salem, where she remained today. Frank had compared Nathan Wells's photograph from a 2018 Roanoke business directory with Nolan Cross's Virginia driver's license. Same height, 6:1. Same build. Same eye color. The directory photo showed Wells with a beard and glasses. Nolan was clean, shaven with contacts. But the jaw structure, the hairline, the spacing of the eyes, Frank said a forensic comparison would confirm it. But he did not need one. Nathan Wells and Nolan Cross were the same person. I sat on the hay bale outside the barn and held the phone against my ear long after Frank stopped speaking. The smallest calico, the one Dorothy had named Penny, came and sat beside me, which she had never done before. I did not read meaning into it. Cats do not understand grief. But I was grateful for the company, because I now understood the full scope of what my son-in-law had done and intended to do again. He had stolen an old woman's farm, pocketed $88,000, and confined her to a facility where she would live out her years separated from everything she had built. Now he was preparing to do the same to me and to Calvin Cross, not out of hatred, but because we were profitable. I asked Frank to compile a complete dossier on Eleanor's case: property records, court filings, Chambers evaluation, the management contract, the below-market sale, and records from the facility. I told him I wanted to visit Eleanor before the court date and ask whether she would testify. Sunday, I did not investigate. I walked every row of the orchard east to west, the way my father taught me, checking each tree the way you check on family. Not because you expect something wrong, but because looking is itself a form of love. I stopped at the oldest tree in row 12, the Albemarle pippin my great-grandfather planted in 1912. Its trunk was scarred, its branches asymmetric, its bark rough enough to catch skin, but it bore fruit every single year. That evening I sat at the kitchen table and organized everything on my laptop into 4 folders: financial fraud, medical fraud, affair evidence, and Eleanor Simmons. I opened a 5th folder and labeled it Court. It was empty, but not for long. I closed the laptop and turned off the kitchen light. Through the window, the orchard stood in moonlight, the rose silver and black and still. The case was nearly complete. What remained was finding Eleanor, securing her testimony, and walking into a courtroom with enough truth to bury every lie Nolan Cross had ever told. Monday, I would drive to Salem. Monday, I would meet the woman whose life my son-in-law had already destroyed once. I drove to Salem on Monday morning, the 4th of November, taking Route 81 south through the valley with the Blue Ridge on my left and a sky the color of old pewter pressing down on the hills. 90 minutes. I spent everyone thinking about what I would say to a woman I had never met, a woman whose farm had been taken by the same man now trying to take mine. I rehearsed several openings. None felt adequate. How do you introduce yourself to someone whose life was destroyed by your son-in-law? I decided I would tell the truth and let Eleanor Simmons decide what to do with it. Shenandoah Pines Assisted Living sat at the end of a quiet road lined with Bradford pears that had already dropped most of their leaves. The building was brick, single-story, clean but institutional, the kind of place that tries to look like a home but cannot hide that it is not one. I signed in at the front desk and told the receptionist I was a friend of Eleanor's late neighbor. That was not true, but it was close enough that I did not feel the weight of it. Eleanor was sitting in a wheelchair by the window when the aide brought me in. 78 years old, small white hair pulled back in a braid, hands resting on a crocheted blanket. The room was neat, single bed, dresser with 3 framed photographs, television on mute, a potted African violet on the windowsill that someone was keeping alive with more care than the rest of the room suggested. Above her bed hung a watercolor painting of a farmhouse with a red barn and green fields stretching to a tree line. It was not generic. That was Eleanor's farm. She looked at me with eyes that were sharp, clear, and immediately skeptical. This was not a woman suffering from cognitive decline. This was a woman who had been put in a box by people who found it convenient to keep her there. "I don't know you," she said. Thin voice. Precise. "No, ma'am. My name is Jean Harwell. I'm a farmer from the Shenandoah Valley. I grow apples, and I believe the man who took your farm is trying to take mine." She studied my face. "Sit down." I sat in the vinyl chair beside her bed and told her everything. The conservatorship plan, the $3.8 million orchard valuation, the $700,000 cider operation, Dr. Martin Chambers and his 8.8% recommendation rate, the $20,000 wire transfer, Calvin Cross and his $1.9 million inheritance, the affair with Stacy, the HIPAA violations, the falsified medical records. Then I told her what Frank had found. A financial advisor named Nathan Wells had approached her family in 2019. Wells and Nolan Cross appeared to be the same person, and the same Dr. Chambers had conducted her evaluation. Eleanor did not interrupt once. She listened the way a person listens when they have waited 5 years for someone to say out loud what they have known in silence. When I finished, she turned her wheelchair to face me directly. An afternoon light fell across the watercolor behind her. "Nathan Wells," she said. Thin face. Tall. Smiled too much. Told my son David I was forgetting to pay the electric bill and leaving the stove on. I was not forgetting anything. I had paid every bill on that farm for 51 years without missing one. But David lived in Charlotte. He visited twice a year, Christmas and my birthday. He did not know what I could do. He only knew what that man told him. She described the process with calm precision. Wells arranged the evaluation with Dr. Chambers. Chambers visited her farm once, for 45 minutes. He asked her to count backward from 100 by sevens, draw a clock face, name the current president. She answered correctly. 2 weeks later, his report stated she exhibited moderate cognitive impairment with diminished capacity for financial decision-making. She never saw the report until after the court granted conservatorship. David was appointed guardian. Wells became financial manager. Within 3 months, the 140-acre farm in her family since 1946 was listed. It sold for $1.1 million. The appraised value had been $1.4 million the year before. Wells took an $88,000 management fee. David placed Eleanor in Shenandoah Pines at $6,200 per month and told her it was for her safety. She had not spoken to him in 3 years. "He is not a bad son," she said quietly. "He is a weak son." And that man knew exactly how to use weakness. I recognized the pattern, the same method Nolan used on Meredith. Find the person who loves the target. Exploit their fear. Convert love into a weapon. Nolan did not need cruel people. He needed frightened ones. Mrs. Simmons. I have a court date on November 12th. I have medical evidence, financial records, recordings, photographs, and an investigation linking Nathan Wells to Nolan Cross. But I do not have a witness who can stand before a judge and say, "This man did it before. He did it to me. And here is what it cost." Eleanor looked at the watercolor on the wall for a long time, long enough that I wondered whether I had pushed too far. Then she looked back at me. "I have not left this building in 14 months. Not because I cannot. Because there was no reason to." She straightened in her chair, and something shifted behind her eyes, a light that had been waiting for a reason to return. "You bring me to that courtroom, Mr. Harwell. You put me in front of that judge. And I will tell them everything." I held her hand. It was small and cool and steady. Through the window, the Bradford pears stood bare against the gray sky. Beyond them, somewhere north, my orchard was waiting. "I will come for you on the morning of the 12th, I said. "I will bring you there myself." Eleanor nodded, then looked at the African violet on her sill. "I have kept that plant alive for 5 years. It was the last thing I took from my kitchen before they moved me. If I can keep that alive, I can do this." I drove home with the windows down despite the cold. The air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and the particular sweetness of late autumn in Virginia. I called Frank from the truck. "Eleanor is in." He was quiet a moment. "That makes 4. Jean, Brett, Meredith, Eleanor, plus Calvin. If we need him. 4 witnesses. 2 independent medical evaluations. 3 recordings. 23 photographs. 6 HIPAA violations. 1 confirmed alias. 1 crooked doctor. And 1 court date 8 days away." I turned onto my gravel road as the sun dropped behind the ridge. The orchard was dark, but I knew every tree by memory. I called Will Taggart on Tuesday morning, the 5th of November. 1 week before the court date. Frank had recommended him, said Taggart was the best elder law attorney in the Shenandoah Valley, maybe in the state, and that he had a particular hatred for conservatorship fraud that went beyond professional obligation. Frank told me Taggart's mother had been placed under an unnecessary guardianship in West Virginia 15 years ago, and that he had spent 2 years fighting to reverse it. He won, but his mother died 4 months after regaining her freedom. Frank said Taggart never talked about it, but it was the reason he practiced the kind of law he practiced. Taggart's office was on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian on Beverly Street in Staunton, above a bookshop. The staircase was narrow. The wallpaper was from another decade, and the waiting room had 2 leather chairs and a framed copy of the 14th Amendment. I liked the man before I met him. He was younger than I expected, 46, according to Frank's file, with a shaved head, wire-rimmed glasses, and a manner that was simultaneously calm and precise. He did not shake my hand with performative firmness. He shook it once, gestured to the chair across his desk, and said, "Tell me everything. Leave nothing out." I spoke for 45 minutes. Taggart took notes on a yellow legal pad with a mechanical pencil, writing in small, even letters that filled each line to the margin. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he set the pencil down, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Mr. Harwell, I have practiced elder law for 19 years. I have seen every kind of conservatorship abuse this state produces. What you have described is not the worst case I have encountered, but it is the most thoroughly documented. That is going to matter. He asked me to bring everything. I opened the laptop Frank had prepared, connected the encrypted USB drive, and walked Taggart through the 4 evidence folders. He spent 90 minutes reviewing the material, pausing frequently to make notes, cross-reference dates, and ask clarifying questions. When he finished, he turned his legal pad toward me and showed me what he had written at the top of a fresh page. 4 words in block letters: financial, medical, personal, pattern. These are our 4 pillars, he said. Every piece of evidence you have fits under one of these categories, and together they tell a story no judge in Virginia will ignore. The first pillar was financial fraud. Taggart outlined the evidence. Nolan's $650,000 in personal debt, his annual income of $38,000, his revoked North Carolina financial advisor license, the $20,000 wire transfer to Dr. Chambers, the recorded conversation in which Nolan described liquidating the orchard for $3.8 million and the cider operation for $700,000 within 60 days of obtaining conservatorship, and his stated intention to file a second petition against Calvin Cross for $1.9 million. The total targeted assets across both schemes, $6.4 million. Taggart said the financial motive was overwhelming and that any competent judge would see the conservatorship petition for what it was. Not an act of family concern, but a mechanism for asset seizure. The second pillar was medical fraud. This included Dr. Martin Chambers' evaluation statistics' 88% conservatorship recommendation rate against the Virginia state average of 38%. The $20,000 payment from Nolan, Stacy Cross's 6 unauthorized accesses of my medical records at Augusta Health, the 3 falsified entries she had added, and the contrast between Chambers' anticipated findings and my 2 independent evaluations. Dr. Langley's assessment showed blood pressure of 122/74, a Montreal Cognitive Assessment score of 29 out of 30, and a signed letter confirming no cognitive impairment. Dr. Osei's 3-hour neuropsychological battery placed me in the 78th percentile for my age cohort, with a 14-page report concluding that any conservatorship petition on cognitive grounds was without medical merit. Taggart said the HIPAA violations alone could result in federal charges against Stacy, and that the gap between Chambers' record and the state average would be devastating under cross-examination. The third pillar was personal misconduct. The affair evidenced 16 time-stamped and GPS-tagged photographs from the Hampton Inn in Harrisonburg, 12 hotel meetings over 14 months, text message transcripts including Stacy's question, "When are you going to leave her?" and Nolan's reply, "Soon, after the financial matters settle," and Meredith's lapel pin recording of the paralegal lunch on Carey Street. Taggart explained that while the affair itself was not illegal, it established a pattern of deception, demonstrated that the financial conspiracy extended into Nolan's intimate relationships, and would destroy his credibility before any judge or jury. The phrase "after the financial matters settle" directly connected the affair to the conservatorship timeline. The fourth pillar was pattern of predation. This was Eleanor Simmons. Taggart reviewed Frank's dossier on the Nathan Wells alias, the Roanoke operation from 2017 to 2019, the targeting of elderly property owners, the identical method free consultation, cooperative family member, Dr. Chambers evaluation, conservatorship filing, asset liquidation. Eleanor's 140-acre farm sold for $1.1 million, $300,000 below appraised value. Wells received an $88,000 management fee. Eleanor was placed in assisted living at $6,200 per month. Taggart said Eleanor's testimony would transform the case from a family dispute into evidence of serial elder fraud, and that it would almost certainly trigger a criminal referral from the bench. "Here is what I need from you," Taggart said. He listed 5 items. 1. Original copies of all recordings on authenticated media. With chain 2 of custody documentation from Frank. 2. Signed affidavits from Brett Cross and Meredith Cross, describing their knowledge of the scheme and their cooperation with the investigation. 3. Both medical evaluation reports with original signatures and dates. 4. Eleanor Simmons' written statement, notarized, plus her confirmed availability to testify in person. 5. Frank DeLuca's investigative summary, signed and dated, with all supporting documentation attached as exhibits. Can you have all of this by Sunday the 10th? Taggart asked. I can have it by Friday, I said. Taggart allowed himself a small smile, the first expression beyond professional neutrality I had seen from him. Friday works. I will file our response to the conservatorship petition on Monday the 11th. One day before the hearing. I want them to have as little time as possible to adjust. I asked him what would happen at the hearing itself. He laid out the sequence. Nolan's attorney would present the petition, supported by Dr. Chambers' evaluation. Meredith was listed as the petitioning family member. The judge would hear testimony from both sides. Taggart's strategy was to let the petitioners present their case. First, let them commit every lie to the record under oath. Then he would dismantle them, pillar by pillar. Brett's recordings first, my medical evaluations second, the affair and HIPAA evidence third, and Eleanor last. Eleanor is the closing argument, he said. Once the judge hears that this has happened before, same man, same doctor, same method, the conservatorship petition will not just be denied. It will be referred for criminal investigation. Chambers will lose his license. And Nolan Cross will face fraud charges in at least 2 jurisdictions. I drove home with a clarity I had not felt since the morning I forgot my medical file and heard voices through the kitchen window. For 5 weeks, I had been gathering pieces. Now I had someone who could assemble them into a weapon. The hearing was 7 days away. The evidence was organized. The witnesses were committed. The strategy was locked. That evening, I stood at the edge of row 12 and looked north across the orchard. The trees were bare now, stripped by wind and the first hard frost. But the root systems were deep and alive beneath the soil, drawing strength from the cold, preparing for a season that had not yet arrived. That is what dormancy is, not death, not surrender, but the quiet accumulation of everything needed to bloom when the time comes. November 12th was coming, and I was ready. November 12th arrived the way all decisive days arrive, ordinary on the surface, electric underneath. I woke at 4:07. 11 minutes before the alarm I had set but did not need. The bedroom was dark. The house was silent except for the ticking of Dorothy's mantel clock in the living room, marking seconds the way it had for 30 years, indifferent to what those seconds contained. I lay still for a moment and listened. Then I got up, showered, shaved, and put on the charcoal suit I had last worn at my wife's funeral 9 years ago. It still fit. I took that as a sign, though I am not a man who believes in signs. By 5:30 I was in the kitchen. I made coffee, scrambled 2 eggs, and ate at the oak table in the quiet. Through the window the orchard was a dark geometry of bare branches against a sky that was just beginning to lighten along the eastern ridge. I washed my plate and cup, dried them, and placed them in the cabinet. I wanted the kitchen to be clean when I came home. I did not know what state I would be in when I returned, and I did not want to face dirty dishes on top of whatever else the day would bring. At 6:15 I drove to Salem to pick up Eleanor Simmons. I had promised her I would bring her to the courtroom myself, and I intended to keep that promise. The drive took 90 minutes in the early morning traffic. Eleanor was ready when I arrived, dressed in a navy blue suit jacket over a white blouse, her hair braided neatly, her hands folded around a small leather purse that looked like it had been waiting in a closet for exactly this occasion. The aide helped her into the passenger seat of my truck. Eleanor buckled her own seatbelt, adjusted the mirror on her side to check her face, and said, "Let's go, Mr. Harwell." We drove north through the valley, mostly in silence, Eleanor watched the mountains. Twice she pointed at farms along the road, once at a cattle operation near Lexington, once at an orchard smaller than mine outside Staunton, and said nothing. Just pointed, the way you acknowledge something familiar that you have lost. When we passed the exit for Roanoke, she turned her face away from the window for a moment. I did not ask why. I knew. We arrived at the Augusta County Courthouse in Staunton at 8:40. 20 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin. The building was brick and white columned. Built in 1901. The kind of Virginia courthouse that communicates permanence and authority, whether you want it to or not. Will Taggart was waiting on the front steps in a dark suit and a burgundy tie, holding a leather briefcase that I knew contained every piece of evidence we had gathered over the past 5 weeks. Beside him stood Frank DeLuca in a gray sport coat, his face expressionless, a second briefcase at his feet containing the original recordings, photographs, and chain of custody documentation. Brett Cross was already inside. He had arrived at 8:15 and was sitting in the third row of the gallery, wearing a blazer I had never seen him in, his jaw tight, his hands clasped between his knees. He did not look at me when I entered. We had agreed on that no visible connection between us until Taggart called him to testify. Meredith arrived at 8:50 with Nolan. I watched them walk through the courthouse doors together, and the sight nearly broke my discipline. My daughter was wearing a gray dress and low heels, and she looked exactly the way she had looked at Dorothy's funeral, composed on the surface, fractured underneath. Nolan walked beside her in a navy suit, his hand on her lower back, guiding her the way a man guides someone he believes he controls. He carried a thin folder. He looked confident. He looked like a man who had done this before and expected the same result. Their attorney, a woman named Sandra Kessler, from the Richmond firm, was already seated at the petitioner's table. She was in her early 50s, polished, efficient, the kind of lawyer who processes conservatorship petitions the way a mill processes grain volume, not conscience. Beside her sat Dr. Martin Chambers, who would serve as the expert medical witness. Chambers was 61, silver-haired, and wore the expression of a man who had testified in dozens of courtrooms and viewed each one as a stage for his professional authority. I studied him from across the room. He did not look nervous. He did not look like a man who knew what was coming. Judge Ruth Calloway entered at 9:03. She was 64 years old, appointed to the Augusta County Circuit Court 11 years ago. With a reputation for thoroughness and a low tolerance for theatrics, Taggart had told me that Calloway was the best judge we could have drawn. Not because she was sympathetic, but because she was meticulous. She would examine every document. She would listen to every recording. She would not be rushed. Kessler opened the petitioner's case at 9:12. She presented the conservatorship petition, filed by Meredith Cross on behalf of the family, requesting full conservatorship over Eugene Harwell, age 70, on grounds of cognitive decline and diminished capacity for financial and personal decision-making. She stated that the petition was supported by a comprehensive medical evaluation conducted by Dr. Martin Chambers, a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist with 32 years of clinical experience. Chambers took the stand at 9:20. He spoke with the measured confidence of a man who had delivered this testimony many times. He described his evaluation of me, which had taken place on November 5th, the Tuesday that Meredith had accompanied me to his Charlottesville office as part of our sting operation. He said I had exhibited signs of short-term memory impairment, confusion regarding financial details, difficulty with sequential reasoning, and intermittent disorientation consistent with early-stage cognitive decline. He recommended full conservatorship with immediate transfer of financial authority to a court-appointed guardian. I sat at the respondent's table beside Taggart and listened to a man I had met once describe a version of me that did not exist. His voice was smooth. His language was clinical. His conclusions were delivered with the gravity of someone who believed his medical degree made him unimpeachable. I watched Judge Calloway as Chambers spoke. She was reading his written report while he testified, her eyes moving between the document and the witness, and twice I saw her pen pause over a line in the report, not marking it, just hovering. The way a person pauses when something does not quite align. Kessler asked Chambers 3 follow-up questions. First, in his professional opinion, was Eugene Harwell capable of managing his financial affairs? Chambers said no. Second, was the cognitive decline he observed likely to be progressive? Chambers said yes, consistent with early-stage dementia. Third, did he recommend immediate intervention? Chambers said he did, for the safety and well-being of the patient. Taggart did not cross-examine. Not yet. He made a brief note on his legal pad, turned to me, and said quietly, "Let them finish. Let them put everything on the record." Kessler called Meredith to the stand. My daughter rose from the gallery, walked to the witness chair, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. She sat down and faced Sandra Kessler, and for a moment, her eyes moved to mine. The look lasted less than a second. But in that second I saw everything. Fear, guilt, resolve, and something that looked like an apology delivered in advance for what she was about to do. Kessler asked Meredith to describe her observations of my cognitive state over the past year. Meredith took a breath, and then she began to speak. Sandra Kessler stood 6 feet from the witness chair and asked my daughter to describe what she had observed over the past 12 months. Meredith folded her hands in her lap, looked at Kessler, then at the judge, then for one moment at Nolan, who sat at the petitioner's table with his thin folder and the composed expression of a man who believed the next 5 minutes would deliver him $4.5 million. "Mrs. Cross, can you tell the court about the changes you have noticed in your father's behavior?" Meredith nodded. "I can tell the court the truth. The shift was imperceptible to anyone not watching for it." Kessler's smile stayed fixed. Judge Calloway's pen did not move, but Taggart placed his hand flat on the table, our agreed signal, meaning, "She is doing it. Stay still." "Over the past 12 months, Meredith said, my husband, Nolan Cross, has systematically constructed a false narrative about my father's cognitive health in order to obtain conservatorship over his estate. I participated in this plan. I am here today to tell the court exactly how it was done." No gasp. No murmur. A silence that spread outward from the witness chair like a crack through glass. Kessler looked at Nolan. His composure held, but something behind his eyes shifted the way a structure shifts a fraction of a second before collapse. Judge Calloway set her pen down and leaned forward. "Mrs. Cross, are you aware that you are under oath?" "Yes, Your Honor. That is why I am saying this now." Taggart rose. "Your Honor, the respondent requests permission to examine this witness." Calloway looked at Kessler, who glanced at Nolan. He gave a small shake of his head, almost invisible. "But I saw it, and I believe the judge saw it too." Kessler said, "The petitioner yields the witness." Taggart approached carrying nothing. No notes, no documents. He had memorized every question. He wanted the judge to see a man who knew this case so thoroughly, he did not need paper. "Mrs. Cross, when did your husband first suggest your father was experiencing cognitive decline?" "March. He said Dad forgot a conversation about fence repairs. He said to watch for patterns." "Did you observe any patterns?" "No. My father managed the orchard, the cider operation, the farm store, the employees, and his finances without assistance. He drove himself everywhere. He remembered every detail of every conversation." "Then why did you agree to pursue a conservatorship?" Meredith's voice dropped, but did not waver. "Because my husband said a specialist, Dr. Chambers, told him early-stage dementia often presents as high-functioning before rapid decline. He said if we didn't act, Dad could lose everything, and I believed him because I was afraid of losing my father the way I lost my mother." Something loosened in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. Nolan had not recruited Meredith through greed. He had used grief. He had taken the most vulnerable part of her, the daughter who watched Dorothy die of pancreatic cancer over 7 months, and turned that wound into a door he could walk through. Taggart continued. Are you aware your husband owes approximately $650,000 in personal debt? I am now. That his financial advisor license was revoked in North Carolina in 2020 for fraud? I am now. That he paid Dr. Chambers $20,000 by wire 3 weeks before your father's evaluation? I am now. Each answer landed like a nail, driven into wood. Kessler sat rigid. Chambers, in the gallery, uncrossed and recrossed his legs. Nolan's face went frozen, not calm, but locked. A man whose calculations were collapsing faster than he could revise them. Taggart requested permission to present recorded evidence. Calloway nodded. He played Brett's first recording. Nolan confirming the evaluation date, describing the plan to liquidate the orchard for $3.8 million, and the cider operation for $700,000 within 60 days. Naming Calvin Cross as the secondary target. When Nolan's voice said, I cannot carry this debt another 6 months, Calloway wrote something on her notepad and underlined it twice. Taggart played Brett's second recording. We handled Gene first, then file on Dad before summer, then Meredith's lapel pin audio from the Carey Street lunch with paralegal Patricia Devane, who outlined the filing procedure and confirmed Chambers' report would meet the evidentiary threshold. When Devane's voice filled the courtroom professionally detached, describing the mechanics of stripping a man's autonomy, Calloway removed her glasses, cleaned them, and replaced them. A judge who removes her glasses is buying herself a moment to process something that has disturbed her. Taggart presented the financial evidence. Debt summary. Revoked license. Wire transfer. Broker valuation. Each document entered as an exhibit. Kessler objected twice authentication, then relevance. Calloway overruled both without explanation. Taggart told me later that was significant. A judge who overrules without explanation has already made her assessment. Then the affair. 16 photographs from the Hampton Inn. Time-stamped. GPS tagged. Text transcripts. When the clerk read Stacy's message, "When are you going to leave her?" and Nolan's reply, "Soon. After the financial matters settle." Brett, in the third row, closed his eyes. He had read those words in my kitchen. Hearing them read in a courtroom, entered into public record, was different. His hands tightened on his knees. Taggart presented the HIPAA evidence. Stacy's 6 unauthorized accesses of my records at Augusta Health. 3 falsified entries, mild cognitive concerns. Occasional confusion regarding medication schedule, and the fabricated cognitive screening recommendation. Beside them, he placed my 2 independent evaluations. Dr. Langley's assessment blood pressure, 122/74, Montreal Cognitive Assessment 29 out of 30, signed letter confirming no impairment, and Dr. Osei's 14-page report placing me in the 78th percentile, concluding any conservatorship petition on cognitive grounds was without medical merit. The contrast was surgical. On one side, a fabricated decline constructed by a nurse sleeping with the petitioner, evaluated by a doctor paid $20,000, presented by an attorney who never questioned the source. On the other, 2 independent physicians with no connection, no incentive, and no reason to lie. Calloway looked at Chambers in the gallery. She did not speak. The look lasted 3 seconds. And in those seconds I saw Chambers understand that his 32-year career had entered its final chapter. Taggart sat beside me and said quietly, "One more witness." I turned. At the back of the courtroom, Frank DeLuca held open the door. Eleanor Simmons rolled through in her wheelchair navy jacket, white blouse, hands steady on the wheels, eyes fixed on the judge's bench with the clarity of a woman who had waited 5 years for this moment. Eleanor Simmons wheeled herself to the front of the courtroom without assistance. Frank had offered to push her, but she declined with a shake of her head that left no room for discussion. She rolled past the gallery, past Brett with his closed fists, past Nolan, whose frozen expression had not changed in 20 minutes, past Kessler staring at her legal pad. Eleanor stopped beside the witness stand, locked her wheels, gripped the wooden rail with one hand and the armrest with the other, and pulled herself to standing. The aide from Shenandoah Pines stepped forward. Eleanor waved her away. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat in the witness chair, not the wheelchair, with the posture of a woman who had waited 60 months for this seat. Taggart approached. His voice was quieter now, as though he understood what was about to be said. Required a different register. Mrs. Simmons, would you tell the court your name, age, and where you currently reside? Eleanor May Simmons, 78. I reside at Shenandoah Pines Assisted Living in Salem, Virginia. 5 years. It was not my choice. Where did you live before? On my family's farm. 140 acres outside Roanoke. My father bought that land in 1946 when he came home from the war. I was born in the farmhouse. I raised my son there. I buried my husband there. I lived on that property for 73 years before it was taken from me. She described how a man named Nathan Wells appeared in the spring of 2019, polite, well-dressed, offering free financial consultations for seniors. He met with her 3 times over 2 weeks, asking about finances, health, routine, and family. She told him her son David lived in Charlotte, visited twice a year, and was not involved in managing the farm. 2 weeks after Wells's last visit, David called from Charlotte, saying Wells had contacted him, suggesting Eleanor was showing confusion, forgetting bills, leaving appliances on. None of it was true. She had not missed a bill in 51 years. But David lived 4 hours away. He only knew what that man told him. David arranged an evaluation. The physician was Dr. Martin Chambers. He visited Eleanor's farm once, 45 minutes. She answered every cognitive test correctly. 2 weeks later, his report recommended full conservatorship, moderate cognitive impairment with diminished capacity for financial decision-making. She never saw the report until after the judge signed the order. David became her legal guardian. Wells was appointed financial manager. Within 3 months, the farm was listed. It sold for $1.1 million, $300,000 below the previous year's appraisal of $1.4 million. Wells took an $88,000 management fee. David placed Eleanor at Shenandoah Pines, $6,200 per month. She had not spoken to him in 3 years. He is not a cruel man, she said softly. He is a frightened man. And frightened people do what they are told by anyone who sounds certain. Taggart let 3 seconds of silence pass. Then he asked the question the entire case had built toward. Mrs. Simmons, do you see anyone in this courtroom who resembles the man you knew as Nathan Wells? Eleanor turned and looked directly at Nolan Cross. She studied his face. The jaw, the hairline, the spacing of the eyes. That man, she said, raising one hand, is Nathan Wells. He is thinner now. He shaved his beard. He wears contacts instead of glasses. But that is the man who came to my farm, spoke to my son, and arranged for Dr. Chambers to take everything I had. Nolan stood. Kessler grabbed his arm. He shook her off and stepped toward the aisle. Judge Calloway's voice stopped him cold. Mr. Cross, you will sit down. Now, he sat. His face was no longer frozen. It was the face of a man who has exhausted every contingency and found nothing left. Kessler whispered something. He did not respond. Taggart entered Frank's investigative summary, alias documentation, physical comparison, Roanoke records, the timeline connecting Wells to Chambers, to Eleanor's conservatorship to the farm sale. He entered Eleanor's notarized statement and the financial records showing the $88,000 fee and the below-market price. Your Honor, Taggart said, the respondent has presented evidence of financial fraud, medical fraud, personal misconduct, and a documented pattern of predatory conservatorship abuse spanning 5 years and 2 known victims. We request that the petition be denied. and that this court refer the matter for criminal investigation. Calloway was silent for a long time. She reviewed her notes, the exhibits, recordings, photographs, medical reports, financial documents, Eleanor's statement. She looked at Chambers in the gallery, head slightly bowed, as though gravity had caught up with 3 decades of fraudulent testimony. She looked at Nolan, staring at the table. She looked at Meredith beside Brett, both motionless. Then she looked at me. "Mr. Harwell, please stand." I stood. Taggart stood beside me. "The petition for conservatorship over Eugene Harwell is without merit and is hereby denied. Furthermore, the evidence raises serious concerns of criminal conduct, including financial fraud, medical fraud, identity fraud, HIPAA violations, and elder abuse. This court refers the matter to the Augusta County Commonwealth's Attorney and the Virginia Attorney General. Dr. Chambers is ordered to surrender his license pending review by the Virginia Board of Medicine. Mr. Cross is ordered to remain within this court's jurisdiction." The gavel fell at 11:47. I had entered that courtroom as a man whose family was trying to take his farm, freedom, and dignity. I left 3 hours later, having kept all 3. Eleanor was near the rear doors in her wheelchair. I knelt and took her hands. "Thank you." She squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "You gave me a reason to leave that building. That is not a small thing." Brett walked past the courthouse steps without stopping, got in his truck, and drove away, a marriage to end and a life to rebuild. Both done the way he did everything, quietly and completely. Meredith stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, staring at the courthouse. I walked to her. She did not speak. I put my arms around her, and she pressed her face against the shoulder of the charcoal suit I had last worn at her mother's funeral and cried the way she had cried. Then silently, completely, with her whole body. "Come home," I said. "We will figure out the rest." Nolan Cross was sentenced on March 14th. The Augusta County Commonwealth's attorney charged him with 2 counts of financial fraud, 1 count of identity fraud, 1 count of elder abuse, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit conservatorship fraud. The Virginia Attorney General added 3 charges from the Eleanor Simmons case: wire fraud, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and filing a false identity document. The trial lasted 6 days. The jury deliberated 3 hours and 40 minutes. Guilty on all counts. 12 years in the Virginia Department of Corrections. Parole eligibility after 8. He was transferred to Augusta Correctional Center, 47 miles from the orchard he had tried to steal. I did not attend the sentencing. I had seen enough of that man in a courtroom. Dr. Martin Chambers surrendered his medical license on December 19th, 5 weeks after our hearing. The Virginia Board of Medicine reviewed all 52 conservatorship evaluations he had conducted over 9 years. Of the 46 recommending full conservatorship, the board identified 19 where evidence of impairment was insufficient, fabricated, or contradicted by independent records. 19 families, 19 people whose autonomy was taken on the word of a man who charged $20,000 per evaluation and never found reason to say no. 11 cases were referred for potential reversal. Chambers faced separate federal healthcare fraud charges. His trial was pending at the 1-year anniversary. Stacey Cross was charged with 6 counts of unauthorized access to protected health information and 3 counts of falsification of medical records under federal HIPAA statutes. She lost her nursing license in January. She accepted a plea in July: 18 months federal custody, 3 years supervised release, permanent disqualification from healthcare. Brett filed for divorce the week after our hearing, finalized in April. He told me once, standing in my cider barn with a glass of Heritage Blend, that losing a wife was not the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing he had never known her. Sandra Kessler was not charged. She had relied on the medical evaluation and the family's representations. With no evidence, she knew the petition was fraudulent. But the Virginia State Bar opened an ethics inquiry into her firm's conservatorship practices. She had not filed a conservatorship petition since November 12th. Patricia Devane cooperated with investigators, confirmed Nolan had initiated contact, and specifically requested Chambers, and was not charged. Calvin Cross was never targeted. Brett destroyed the power of attorney form, and Taggart notified the Richmond attorney that any petition involving Calvin would trigger immediate legal action and federal referral. Calvin remained independent in his Richmond home. We spoke every Sunday at 7, the check-in from the Maple Leaf Cafe. We never missed a week. Over time, the calls shifted from strategy to something simpler. Two old men talking about their weeks, their health, their memories, and the quiet satisfaction of still being in charge of their own lives. Eleanor Simmons did not return to her farm. The property had been sold, subdivided, and partially developed. But Taggart filed a motion to vacate her conservatorship based on Chambers' fraudulent evaluation and Nathan Wells's criminal conduct. Granted in February, her legal autonomy was restored for the first time in 5 years. She remained at Shenandoah Pines not because she had to, but because at 78, with no farm and no family willing to help, she had nowhere else to go. I visited her the first Saturday of every month and brought apples Gold Rush in winter, Arkansas Black in spring, Albemarle Pippins in fall. The African violet on her windowsill was still alive. Meredith moved back to the farm in December. She took the upstairs bedroom she had slept in as a child, the one with the east-facing window over row 12. She did not ask for forgiveness, and I did not offer it, not from unwillingness, but because forgiveness is not a transaction. It is a season. It arrives when the ground is ready. We worked side by side through winter pruning, repairing equipment, planning spring grafts. She took over the farm store's accounting in January. By March, she managed vendor relationships and negotiated distribution with 3 regional grocery chains. She had always been good at numbers. The difference was that now she used them for the family instead of against it. Thomas flew from Seattle for Christmas. Lily drove from Nashville with her husband and their 2-year-old daughter, whom I had not met. We ate dinner at the oak table, all of us. First time in 3 years. Nobody mentioned Nolan. Lily's daughter knocked over a glass of cider and laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen the way sunlight fills a room completely, without effort, without asking permission. In spring, I established the Shenandoah Elder Shield Foundation with a $200,000 personal endowment. Taggart served as board counsel. Frank DeLuca joined as investigative consultant. The mission: free legal and investigative support for elderly Virginians facing fraudulent conservatorship petitions. In 6 months, the foundation intervened in 4 cases. 3 petitions were withdrawn before hearing. The 4th went to trial. We won. Eleanor became honorary chair. Her health had begun to decline in ways that were real, not fabricated, and she never attended a meeting. But her name was on the letterhead, her story on the website. And every person who contacted the foundation learned about the woman who lost her farm. Waited 5 years in a room with 1 window and an African violet, and stood up in a courtroom and told the truth. On November 12th, 1 year from the hearing, I held the farm's Harvest Festival. 200 people came. Hayrides through the orchard, cider tastings, a pie contest judged by Dr. C. Langley, who had no baking expertise but considerable expertise in fairness. Meredith ran the event. Brett brought his daughter Sophie, a quiet 11-year-old who spent the afternoon climbing trees in row 12. Calvin drove from Richmond with bourbon and a handshake that lasted longer than usual. I stood at the orchard's edge as the sun went down. The trees were bare again, the way they had been the night before the trial. But this time, the bareness did not feel like loss. It felt like clarity, the landscape stripped to its structure. Every branch visible, every line honest. Dorothy would have loved this. She would have argued with Langley about crust texture, found Sophie in the trees and told her which branches were strongest, stood beside me and said what she always said when the harvest was done. "Well, Jean, we made it through another one." I said it aloud. To no one. And to her. We made it through another one. I turned off the barn lights, locked the cider press, and walked home through the dark orchard. The ground was cold beneath my boots. The stars were out, And somewhere in the branches above me, next year's fruit was already forming, invisible, silent, inevitable.